My name is Harper Mitchell, 32 years old, and Compliance Director at Sterling Financial Services. Today was supposed to be my moment to shine, leading our biggest client pitch of the year. I spent weeks perfecting every detail, ensuring every regulation was followed. Yet here I stand outside the locked conference room door watching through the glass as Trevor, our CEO's son, presents my work. I see his smirk as he notices me, his eyes, saying what his mouth had told me earlier. Let's see how she handles it. If only he knew what was coming next. Before I tell you how this unfolded, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever been undermined at work and stayed professional, despite wanting to scream. I've spent 8 years building my career in financial compliance, a field that requires meticulous attention to detail and unwavering integrity. After earning my MBA with a specialization in financial regulations, I worked at 2 major firms before joining Sterling Financial Services 3 years ago. Sterling isn't the biggest name in the industry, but we've been growing rapidly, acquiring smaller firms and expanding our client base across the East Coast. Richard Sterling founded the company 15 years ago after leaving a prestigious position at Goldman Sachs. Unlike many finance executives with questionable ethics, Richard built his reputation on integrity and transparency. His personal motto, displayed prominently in our lobby, reads, "Success without compliance isn't success at all." This philosophy resonated with me deeply and was a major reason I joined the company. When I first interviewed with Richard, his passion for building an ethical financial institution was palpable. "Harper," he said, leaning forward in his leather chair, "I want Sterling to be the company other firms look to as the gold standard for compliance." He explained how the 2008 financial crisis had shaped his business philosophy and how he wanted to prove that following regulations wasn't just legally necessary but good business. Then there's Trevor Sterling, Richard's 35-year-old son. Despite having only 3 years of actual finance experience at another firm, Trevor was appointed as Vice President of Business Development shortly before I joined. Where Richard is thoughtful and measured, Trevor is impulsive and aggressive. He has his father's charisma but none of his patience. His office walls showcase photos of him with celebrities and politicians, unlike his father's simple family photos and industry awards. Initially, Trevor and I had a cordial professional relationship. He was charming, quick to compliment my work, and seemed genuinely interested in learning about compliance. We sometimes grabbed lunch together, and he'd ask thoughtful questions about regulatory frameworks. I was impressed by his desire to understand my area of expertise. That relationship began to deteriorate about 6 months in, when I flagged several compliance issues in one of Trevor's proposals for a new investment product. While Richard thanked me for catching potential violations before they happened, Trevor was visibly annoyed. "Rules are meant to be bent, Harper," he said casually after the meeting. "Nobody gets ahead by playing it completely safe." Over time, our interactions grew increasingly tense. Trevor would roll his eyes whenever I raised compliance concerns in meetings. He started referring to me as the roadblock when talking to other executives. Several times I overheard him complaining to colleagues that my obsession with regulations was slowing down the company's growth. Despite this tension, our professional paths didn't significantly cross until the Westfield Group opportunity emerged. Westfield, a $50 billion investment management company, was looking to outsource some of their financial services. Landing them as a client would mean a $50 million contract over 5 years, potentially transforming Sterling from a mid-sized player to a major industry contender. Richard assigned Trevor and me as co-leads on the Westfield proposal, a decision that surprised both of us. "Trevor knows how to sell," Richard explained during the project kickoff meeting, "and Harper knows how to keep us safe. I need both perspectives on this one." Trevor forced a smile, but I could see the frustration in his eyes at having to share leadership. For 6 weeks, our team worked tirelessly on the proposal. I led the compliance and risk management sections, while Trevor handled the business development and relationship aspects. Our team of 12 people often worked late into the night, ordering takeout and refining our presentation slides. As we dug deeper into Westfield's requirements, I identified numerous potential compliance issues that needed addressing. Their operations spanned multiple regulatory jurisdictions, including some international markets with complex rules. Each issue I identified meant more work, more documentation, and potentially less aggressive strategies than Trevor wanted to propose. "Can we just address these after we get the contract?" Trevor asked, during one particularly heated meeting, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "We're never going to win this if we showcase all the limitations up front." I stood my ground. "That's not how compliance works, Trevor. We can't promise what we can't legally deliver, and lying by omission would violate multiple regulations." Richard backed me up when Trevor escalated the issue. "Harper's right," he said firmly. "We do this by the book or not at all." Trevor stormed out of Richard's office that day, slamming the door behind him. As the presentation date approached, our team created a comprehensive proposal that balanced ambitious business strategies with proper regulatory frameworks. The night before our final internal review, I stayed until 11 p.m. finalizing the compliance documentation, feeling confident we had created something both persuasive and proper. Little did I know that my dedication to doing things right was about to be used against me in a way I never expected. The day before our scheduled pitch to Westfield Group, our team gathered for one final review meeting. The conference room buzzed with nervous energy as we flipped through presentation slides and rehearsed key talking points. Everything seemed on track until we reached the section on regulatory compliance for international transactions, a complex area I had spent days researching and documenting. "This section is too detailed," Trevor interrupted, pointing to my carefully crafted slides. "It makes us look hesitant and overly cautious. Westfield wants boldness, not a list of regulatory hurdles." "These aren't hurdles," Trevor first countered, keeping my voice level despite my growing frustration. "These are legal requirements that protect both Westfield and us. Ignoring them would be negligent." Trevor's jaw tightened. "We're not ignoring anything. We'll address all this after we sign the contract. Right now we need to focus on what we can do for them, not what we can't." "That's misleading," I insisted. "We can't promise services we aren't certain we can legally provide." The room grew uncomfortably quiet as other team members shifted in their seats, avoiding eye contact. This wasn't the first time Trevor and I had clashed over compliance issues, but the stakes had never been this high. "Look, Harper," Trevor finally said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I understand you're just doing your job, but sometimes you need to see the bigger picture. My father might indulge your excessive caution, but in the real business world, everyone understands there's flexibility in how rules are applied." I felt my cheeks flush with anger but maintained my professional demeanor. "There's a difference between flexibility and misrepresentation, Trevor. I won't put my name on something that could potentially violate federal regulations." "Fine," Trevor snapped, gathering his papers. "I'll make the necessary adjustments tonight. Everyone be here tomorrow at 7:30 a.m. sharp for final preparations. The Westfield team arrives at 9. As the meeting disbanded, Sarah Mitchell, one of my team members, whispered, "Don't worry, Harper. Everyone knows you're right about this." I spent that evening at home, reviewing every detail of our proposal, making notes on my concerns, and preparing additional documentation to support my position. I emailed these to Trevor, copying our entire team, suggesting specific language that would maintain our competitive pitch while ensuring regulatory compliance. "Attached are my final recommendations," I wrote. "I'm confident these changes will allow us to present an aggressive yet compliant proposal. Let me know if you'd like to discuss before tomorrow." Trevor never replied. The next morning I arrived at the office at 7 a.m., earlier than the requested time, carrying a binder of supplementary materials I'd prepared overnight. The office was unusually quiet. Checking my phone, I noticed no new emails from Trevor or any team members, which struck me as odd given the importance of the day. At 7:25, I headed to our main conference room, surprised to find it dark and locked. Confused, I checked the meeting schedule on my phone again, confirming the 7:30 a.m. meeting in the main conference room. Just then, my phone pinged with a calendar update. Our prep meeting had been moved to the executive conference room on the top floor, starting at 7 instead of 7:30. The update had been sent at 6:50 a.m., while I was already commuting. Heart racing, I rushed to the elevator, frustrated but trying to stay focused on the presentation ahead. When I reached the executive floor, I heard voices coming from behind the closed conference room door. Through the glass panel, I could see Trevor standing at the head of the table, gesturing confidently as he spoke to our assembled team and several people I recognized as Westfield executives. The meeting wasn't just relocated and rescheduled, it had already started without me. I tried the door handle. Locked. Trevor glanced up, noticing me outside. A small, satisfied smirk crossed his face before he continued his presentation, pointing to slides I had created. Through the glass, I could make out that many of my compliance slides had been significantly altered or removed entirely. For a moment, I stood frozen, a mix of shock, betrayal, and humiliation washing over me. My first instinct was to knock demand entry, create a scene if necessary. But some deeper instinct held me back. This was too deliberate, too calculated. Trevor wanted me to react emotionally, to look unprofessional. As I stood there, Jennifer Watson from our marketing team emerged from the elevator carrying coffee trays. "Harper, why aren't you in there?" she asked, noticing my position outside the door. "That's a good question," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "The meeting was rescheduled without proper notice, and now I'm locked out." Jennifer's eyes widened. "That's strange. Trevor told everyone yesterday afternoon that you were struggling to finalize your compliance sections and needed extra time. He said you agreed he should handle the presentation alone to keep things moving forward." The betrayal cut deep, but I maintained my composure. "That's absolutely not true. I had everything prepared and sent him additional materials last night." Jennifer looked uncomfortable. "I don't know what's going on, but this doesn't seem right. Do you want me to try to get you in? I have to deliver these coffees anyway." I considered my options quickly. Making a scene would only reinforce whatever narrative Trevor was spinning about me being difficult or unprepared. Instead, I shook my head. "No, thank you. I'm going to document what's happening and handle this properly." I took out my phone and discreetly photographed Trevor presenting my altered materials through the glass door. Smart Jennifer nodded, looking impressed. What Trevor's doing doesn't sit right with me. As Jennifer entered with the coffee, Trevor barely acknowledged the interruption, continuing his confident pitch. I noticed several Westfield executives nodding along, seemingly impressed by the bold strategies he was outlining, unaware of the compliance corners being cut. Rather than creating a scene, I retreated to my office, immediately documenting the morning's events in an email to myself, creating a time-stamped record. I also pulled up the original presentation files, comparing them to what I could see through the door. Trevor had systematically removed or downplayed every compliance caveat and regulatory warning I had included. The pitch now promised services and timelines that would be nearly impossible to deliver within legal frameworks. It was everything I had feared, and worse. I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. The company was being placed at serious legal risk, and the Westfield executives were being misled. I needed to act, but strategically and professionally. What happened next would determine not just my future at Sterling Financial, but potentially the future of the company itself. With my heart still pounding, I picked up my office phone and dialed Amanda Lee, Richard Sterling's executive assistant. Amanda had been with Richard since he founded the company and was known for her discretion and loyalty. "Amanda, it's Harper Mitchell," I said when she answered. "Is Richard available? It's extremely urgent regarding the Westfield presentation." "Richard is in a meeting with the board until 11, Amanda replied. "But you sound distressed. What's happening?" I explained the situation quickly, careful to stick to verifiable facts rather than assumptions about Trevor's motivations. There was a long pause on the line. "Harper, there's something you should know," Amanda finally said. Her voice lowered. "The quarterly compliance audit team is scheduled to arrive at 11:30 today." My breath caught. The quarterly compliance audits were conducted by an independent firm and were known for their thoroughness. The timing of their visits was always kept confidential until the day of, to ensure they saw our operations as they truly were not specially prepared for inspection. "Does Trevor know about this?" I asked. "Only the executive leadership and compliance directors such as yourself are informed of audit schedules," Amanda confirmed. "Richard was going to notify all relevant parties this morning." This explained Trevor's urgency in excluding me and altering the presentation. If the deal was signed before the auditors arrived, he could argue it was too late to back out regardless of compliance issues. "Amanda, I need 15 minutes with Richard as soon as his board meeting ends. This is potentially very serious." "I'll make it happen," she promised. "In the meantime, document everything." I spent the next 2 hours meticulously comparing the original presentation with what I could see through periodic glimpses of the meeting. Trevor had removed approximately 40% of the compliance information, including crucial warnings about international regulatory requirements. At 11 sharp, Amanda called to say Richard would see me immediately. When I entered his office, Richard was reviewing board meeting notes, his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. "Harper, what's so urgent that couldn't wait until after the Westfield presentation?" he asked, looking up from his papers. Calmly and factually, I outlined the morning's events. I showed him the calendar manipulation, the photos of Trevor, presenting altered materials and side-by-side comparisons of the original and modified presentations. Richard's expression darkened as I spoke. "You're telling me Trevor deliberately excluded you from a presentation you co-led and substantially altered compliance information without authorization?" "Yes, sir. And based on what I could observe, he's promising Westfield services and timelines that would likely violate multiple regulations." Richard removed his glasses and pinched the bridge of his nose. "The audit team will be here in 30 minutes. "I'm aware," I nodded. "That's why I felt this couldn't wait." "This is." Richard trailed off uncharacteristically at a loss for words. "Wait here. I need to see this for myself." As Richard left, I sat in his office, anxiety building. Through the large windows, I could see the city skyline, the same view that had inspired me during my first interview with Richard. I'd been so proud to join a company that supposedly valued integrity above all else. 20 minutes later, Richard returned, his face grim. "They're nearly ready to sign," he said quietly. "Trevor has convinced Westfield that we can implement their entire international portfolio transition within 60 days, with guaranteed returns exceeding market averages." I couldn't hide my shock. That's impossible without cutting significant regulatory corners. The documentation requirements alone would take at least 90 days, and we can never guarantee returns. "I know," Richard nodded, "but interrupting now would kill the deal entirely. The audit team is already in the building. Let this play out." "Sir, with all due respect, allowing them to sign now would be knowingly entering a fraudulent agreement." Richard held up his hand. "I'm not suggesting we finalize anything problematic. I want to see exactly how far Trevor has gone with this. Sometimes the best way to address a problem is to let it fully reveal itself." Before I could respond, Richard's phone buzzed. Amanda's voice came through the speaker. "The audit team has arrived early. Elizabeth Jackson is leading the team again." Richard and I exchanged glances. Elizabeth Jackson was known for her thoroughness and uncompromising standards. "Perfect timing," Richard said with a grim smile. "Have them proceed directly to the executive conference room. Tell them we're conducting a major client presentation they should include in their audit." My stomach tightened. This was about to become very uncomfortable for everyone involved. "What would you like me to do?" I asked. "Prepare a complete set of the original presentation materials and all your compliance documentation. When this explodes, and it will, we'll need to show Westfield what should have been presented." As I gathered my materials, word spread through the office that something was happening. Thomas Reynolds, our legal counsel, stopped by my office. "Harper, what's going on?" "I just heard the audit team is heading into Trevor's Westfield presentation." I explained the situation briefly. Thomas paled. "This could expose us to significant liability. If Trevor has misrepresented our compliance capabilities to a client of Westfield's size." "I know." I nodded. "That's why I've documented everything." "Smart," Thomas said. But be prepared. Trevor has allies here. People are already saying you sabotaged the presentation out of jealousy. This stung but didn't surprise me. Trevor had spent years cultivating relationships throughout the company, often through lavish happy hours and sports tickets. The truth will come out, I said, with more confidence than I felt. By noon, the tension in the office was palpable. Staff members whispered in corners, glancing my way with either sympathy or suspicion. I remained at my desk, calmly organizing documentation while bracing for the fallout. At 12:30, the storm broke. Even from my office, I could hear Richard's voice thundering down the hallway from the executive conference room. WHO approved this without her. The question echoed what I had been asking myself all morning. How could Trevor think he would get away with this? Did he truly believe his father's commitment to compliance was just for show? Sarah Mitchell appeared at my door, eyes wide. Harper, you need to come now. Elizabeth Jackson is asking for you, and Trevor is trying to blame you for everything. Taking a deep breath, I gathered my files and prepared to face the confrontation that had been brewing since the moment I found myself locked out of that conference room door. I walked briskly toward the executive conference room, my heart racing, but my exterior calm. Through the glass, I could see the scene unfolding like a corporate drama. Trevor stood red-faced at the head of the table, gesturing animatedly. Richard, normally the picture of composed leadership, had both palms flat on the table, leaning forward with an intensity I'd never witnessed before. The Westfield executives looked confused and concerned, while Elizabeth Jackson and her two fellow auditors maintained professional poker faces as they reviewed documents spread before them. Sarah squeezed my arm before I entered. He's trying to say you approved these changes last night but failed to show up this morning. Don't let him get away with it. I nodded, squared my shoulders, and opened the door. All conversation stopped as I entered, every head turning in my direction. Ah, Miss Mitchell. Thank you for joining us. Elizabeth Jackson said, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. We were just discussing some concerning discrepancies between the services being promised to Westfield Group and what appears to be legally feasible under current regulations. Trevor jumped in immediately. Harper, there you are. I was just explaining how we had agreed to these adjustments last night, and then you inexplicably failed to appear this morning. His voice carried a forced friendliness that didn't reach his eyes. Richard Sterling's face was a storm cloud. That's not what your calendar manipulation suggests, Trevor. Before I could speak, Elizabeth slid a document across the table. Miss Mitchell, this presentation promises Westfield a 60-day implementation timeline for their Asia-Pacific portfolio transition with guaranteed minimum returns. It states that all regulatory hurdles have been addressed and approvals secured. As compliance director, did you sign off on these claims? The room fell silent as all eyes turned to me. This was the moment of truth. I could feel Trevor's glare burning into me, silently demanding loyalty to the company, or perhaps to his version of events. The Westfield team looked concerned and uncertain, clearly wondering if they'd been misled or if they were witnessing an internal power struggle. No, I did not. I stated clearly, my voice stronger than I expected. In fact, I was deliberately excluded from this morning's presentation after raising significant compliance concerns about these exact claims. Michael Thompson, Westfield's chief investment officer, leaned forward. Excluded. What exactly does that mean? It means, I explained, placing my documentation on the table, that after I insisted on maintaining proper regulatory disclosures in our proposal, Mr. Sterling rescheduled this morning's meeting without adequate notice, began the presentation early, and physically locked me out of this room. I slid forward the time-stamped photos I'd taken. I have documented evidence of this, along with the original presentation materials that were approved by our compliance team. Trevor's face flushed deeper. That's absurd. You're twisting what happened because you're jealous of my relationship with the client. Trevor, enough. Richard's voice cracked like thunder. He turned to the Westfield executives. Gentlemen, ladies, I must apologize profoundly for this situation. It appears my son has taken unacceptable liberties with our presentation and processes. Elizabeth Jackson tapped her pen on a particular section of the proposal. According to our review, this document promises regulatory approvals that haven't been obtained and likely couldn't be obtained within the specified timeframe. It also guarantees financial outcomes that no reputable financial institution can legally promise. These are potentially serious violations. Trevor scrambled to regain control. These are just projection models, not guarantees. Harper is blowing this out of proportion because she's overly cautious. The fact is, her excessive focus on regulations was jeopardizing this entire opportunity. Michael Thompson from Westfield frowned. From where I sit, proper regulatory compliance isn't excessive, but essential. We specifically chose Sterling because of your reputation for integrity. Trevor changed tactics instantly. Of course, and that integrity remains intact. These are simply aggressive but achievable targets that would violate at least 7 federal regulations, Elizabeth interrupted, her tone flat, and potentially expose both Sterling and Westfield to significant liability. Exactly the concerns I raised yesterday, I added, opening my laptop to display the email I'd sent Trevor with my recommendations. I specifically advised against making these claims and provided compliant alternatives that would still offer Westfield excellent service. Richard's expression had shifted from anger to deep disappointment as he looked at his son. Trevor, did you deliberately lock Harper out of this presentation because she raised these compliance issues? All eyes turned to Trevor, whose confident facade began to crack. I made a judgment call. Her overcautious approach was going to cost us this deal. Sometimes leadership means making difficult decisions for the good of the company. By presenting fraudulent claims, Richard's voice was dangerously quiet. They're not fraudulent, Trevor insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. They're aspirational. Elizabeth closed her portfolio with a snap. Mr. Sterling, as the lead auditor, I must inform you that I cannot, in good conscience, allow this agreement to proceed as presented. The compliance issues are too significant to ignore. The Westfield team exchanged concerned glances. Jessica Parker, their legal counsel, spoke up. We would need to review a fully compliant version before moving forward. This raises serious questions about Sterling's internal processes. Trevor made one last desperate attempt. This is Harper's fault. If she hadn't been so rigid and uncooperative, we could have found a middle ground. She's deliberately sabotaged this deal. The accusation hung in the air for a moment, before Richard slammed his hand on the table with such force that coffee cups jumped. Who approved this? Without her, he roared, his face red, with barely contained fury. Harper is our compliance director. Any presentation of this magnitude requires her sign-off, which you deliberately avoided. You locked her out, Trevor. You altered her materials. You lied to this room full of people. The silence that followed was deafening. Trevor stood speechless, his career crumbling before his eyes. Michael Thompson, from Westfield, finally broke the silence. I think we need to take a step back here. While we're still interested in working with Sterling, we need to be confident in the company's compliance procedures. It was in this moment of crisis that I saw an opportunity not just to save my reputation, but potentially the deal itself, though on honest terms. If I may, I said, stepping forward with quiet confidence, I have the complete compliant version of our proposal here. While it doesn't promise the unrealistic timelines and guarantees you were just offered, it does provide a solid, legally sound framework for what would still be an excellent partnership. Richard looked at me with newfound respect. Miss Jackson, would you and your team be willing to review Harper's version while we take a break? I want to ensure everything we present moving forward meets your standards. Elizabeth nodded. We can do that. In the meantime, I suggest everyone take some time to collect themselves. As the room began to clear, Trevor approached me, his voice low and threatening. You've made an enemy today. My father won't run this company forever. I met his gaze steadily. I wasn't trying to make an enemy, Trevor. I was doing my job. The job your father hired me to do. As Trevor stormed out, I realized that the real test wasn't just standing up to him in this moment, but what would happen next. The damage control needed would be extensive, and the company's reputation hung in the balance. As the tension in the room reached a breaking point, I knew this was my moment to step up and demonstrate true leadership. With Trevor storming out and the Westfield executives looking increasingly doubtful about proceeding with Sterling, I took a deep breath and addressed the room. I understand everyone's concerns. I began, my voice calm but authoritative. What's happened here today is unfortunate, but it doesn't represent who Sterling Financial really is, or the quality of service we can provide Westfield Group. Richard gave me an appreciative nod, silently encouraging me to continue. If you'll allow me, I said, opening my laptop and connecting it to the presentation screen, I'd like to show you the original fully compliant proposal that my team developed. Michael Thompson from Westfield leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. At this point, Miss Mitchell, why should we trust anything from Sterling? This has been highly unprofessional. His question was fair. Trust had been severely damaged, and I needed to rebuild it quickly. Because unlike what you've seen so far today, everything I'm about to show you has been vetted by our compliance and legal teams with full documentation to support every claim, I replied. And because Sterling's reputation for integrity wasn't built on empty promises, but on 15 years of Richard Sterling's commitment to doing business the right way. I glanced at Richard, who straightened his tie, and addressed the Westfield team directly. What my son did today goes against everything this company stands for. I won't make excuses for him, but I will ask that you judge Sterling Financial by its full team and its actual track record, not by one person's serious lapse in judgment. Elizabeth Jackson from the audit team spoke up. Perhaps we should review Miss Mitchell's materials before making any decisions. As independent auditors, we can confirm whether her version meets regulatory requirements. For the next 30 minutes, I walked through the proper presentation, clearly highlighting where Trevor's version had deviated from regulatory compliance. I explained each compliance consideration thoroughly, but also emphasized the solutions my team had developed to address Westfield's needs within legal frameworks. Yes, the implementation would take 90 days rather than 60, I acknowledged, but it would be done right with proper documentation and approval processes. And while we can't guarantee specific returns, our track record shows consistent outperformance within this asset class. As I spoke, I could see the Westfield executives' expressions shifting from skepticism to renewed interest. Jessica Parker, their legal counsel, took particular interest in the compliance safeguards I outlined. These foreign regulatory filing procedures are much more comprehensive than what we were shown earlier, she noted. This actually addresses several concerns our internal compliance team had raised. David Garcia, Sterling's CFO, who had joined us midway through my presentation, added supporting financial projections that were both ambitious and realistic. Thomas Reynolds, our legal counsel, provided additional context on the regulatory frameworks involved. After nearly 2 hours of detailed discussion, Michael Thompson from Westfield leaned forward. This is more along the lines of what we expected from Sterling in the first place. I appreciate your candor about the timelines and requirements. Elizabeth Jackson and her audit team had been taking extensive notes throughout. Now she closed her notebook and addressed the room. From a compliance perspective, this revised proposal meets all regulatory requirements. The implementation timeline is realistic, the disclosures are appropriate, and the performance projections are properly qualified. Richard Sterling clasped his hands together. So where does this leave us, Mr. Thompson? I understand if Westfield needs time to reconsider our relationship. Thompson exchanged glances with his colleagues before responding. We came here today intending to form a partnership with Sterling Financial because of your reputation for integrity and competence. What we witnessed initially was concerning, but Miss Mitchell's handling of the situation actually demonstrates that this reputation is well deserved. My heart leapt with hope as he continued. However, we would have some conditions moving forward. First, we'd want Miss Mitchell to personally oversee compliance for our account. Second, we'd need written confirmation of the implementation timeline and deliverables as presented in her version of the proposal. Richard didn't hesitate. Those terms are more than reasonable. Harper would be the perfect lead on this project. The mood in the room had transformed completely. What had started as a potential disaster was turning into a victory, not just for me personally, but for the principles of integrity and proper business conduct. As we broke for a late lunch, Richard pulled me aside. "Harper, I can't begin to express how grateful I am," he said quietly. "You saved more than this deal today. You saved the reputation of my company." "I was just doing my job, sir." "No," Richard shook his head. "You did far more than your job. When most people would have created a scene this morning upon finding themselves locked out, you documented everything professionally. When Trevor tried to blame you, you responded with facts, not accusations. And when the deal was falling apart, you stepped in with solutions, not recriminations." The rest of the afternoon was spent refining the agreement with Westfield. By 5:30 p.m., we had a preliminary agreement, signed contingent on final legal review. The Westfield team left with handshakes all around, their confidence in Sterling restored despite the rocky start. As the day wound down, word had spread throughout the office about what had happened. Sarah Mitchell and Jennifer Watson both stopped by to congratulate me. "The way you handled Trevor was legendary," Jennifer grinned. "Professional, but absolutely devastating." Sarah nodded in agreement. "You showed everyone what real leadership looks like, standing up for what's right without making it personal." I appreciated their support but knew the story wasn't over. Trevor's humiliation would have consequences, and navigating the aftermath would require continued diplomacy and professionalism. Richard called an emergency executive meeting for the following morning. As I left the office that evening, exhausted, but relieved, Amanda Lee caught me at the elevator. "Richard asked me to give you this," she said, handing me an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Harper, today you embodied everything Sterling Financial should stand for. We'll talk more tomorrow about your future here. With profound gratitude, Richard." I smiled, tucking the note into my purse. After a day that had begun with betrayal and exclusion, ending it with validation and respect felt like the sweetest possible victory. As I drove home, I reflected on how differently things might have gone if I had reacted emotionally rather than strategically. By maintaining my professionalism, even when Trevor abandoned his, I had not only protected my career but strengthened it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but for tonight, I could rest knowing I had stayed true to my principles and proven their value beyond any doubt. 1 week after the Westfield presentation debacle, Sterling Financial held an all-hands meeting. The large conference room was packed with employees from every department, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Richard Sterling stood at the podium, his expression solemn as he addressed the assembled staff. "As most of you have heard by now, we had a significant incident during the Westfield Group presentation last week," he began. "What you may not know is the full extent of what happened and the changes that will result from it." Richard proceeded to outline in measured but clear terms how Trevor had deliberately excluded me from the presentation and altered compliance materials without authorization. He didn't name Trevor explicitly, referring instead to senior leadership actions that violated company policy, but everyone knew who he meant. "Effective immediately, we are implementing new procedures to ensure this never happens again," Richard continued. "All client presentations must receive documented compliance approval, and any changes after that approval require additional sign-off. No exceptions, regardless of position or last name." The room was silent, as Richard paused, his gaze sweeping across the assembled employees. "Additionally, I'm announcing several organizational changes. Harper Mitchell is being promoted to Senior Director of Compliance and Risk Management, with expanded authority over all client-facing materials." A wave of whispers spread through the room. Several colleagues turned to smile at me, while others looked surprised or concerned. I maintained a neutral expression, though inside I felt a surge of pride and validation. After the meeting, David Garcia, our CFO, stopped me in the hallway. "Congratulations, Harper. Though I have to admit I was skeptical about your strict approach to compliance before all this. I thought you were being overly cautious." "I appreciate your honesty, David," I replied. Compliance isn't about saying no to everything. It's about finding the right way to say yes. He nodded thoughtfully. I see that now. Richard wants us to meet tomorrow to discuss the new approval workflows. Throughout the day, reactions to my promotion varied widely. Some colleagues were genuinely happy for me stopping by my office with congratulations. Jennifer brought me a coffee and a card signed by several team members. You earned this, she said warmly. And honestly, it's about time someone stood up to Trevor. Others were more reserved or even cold. Trevor had built a network of allies during his years at Sterling, particularly among the sales team who often chafed at compliance restrictions. I overheard Bradley Cooper from Business Development muttering to a colleague, "Great, now the hall monitor has even more power to slow everything down." I chose to ignore these reactions, focusing instead on developing the new approval procedures Richard had requested. The following day would bring a more difficult conversation. At 9 a.m., Richard's assistant Amanda called to let me know he wanted to see me in his office. When I arrived, I found Richard looking tired but resolute. "Please sit down, Harper," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "First, I want to personally apologize for what my son put you through. There's no excuse for his behavior." "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." Richard sighed heavily. "Trevor has been suspended for 2 weeks without pay. When he returns, he'll be reassigned to our client services department as a senior manager, not an executive. He needs to relearn the fundamentals of our business and our values." I nodded, unsure what response was appropriate. Richard seemed to understand my hesitation. "I know this puts you in an awkward position," he continued. "Trevor is my son, but that doesn't excuse his actions. I want you to know that your position here is secure, regardless of any family dynamics." "I appreciate your support," I said carefully. "I never wanted this to become a personal conflict. My only concern was ensuring we maintained regulatory compliance." Richard leaned back in his chair. "That's why I'm promoting you. You showed integrity and leadership when it mattered most." He paused, looking out the window briefly before continuing. "I've been blind to some of Trevor's shortcomings. I thought giving him responsibility would help him grow into the role. Instead, I set him up to fail by not requiring him to earn his position." The vulnerability in Richard's admission was unexpected. In that moment, he wasn't just my boss, but a father struggling with the difficult balance between supporting his son and running his company ethically. "We all make mistakes," I offered. "What matters is how we respond to them." Richard smiled slightly. "Wise words. Now let's talk about your new role and the Westfield account." Over the next hour, we discussed my expanded responsibilities and the implementation plan for Westfield. As Senior Director, I would now report directly to Richard and have authority to review all major business initiatives for compliance issues. When I left Richard's office, I ran into Thomas Reynolds, our legal counsel. "Congratulations on the promotion," he said. "Well deserved. But be prepared, Trevor isn't taking this well. He's been calling some board members suggesting you manipulated the situation." I felt a flash of anger, but pushed it aside. The facts speak for themselves. I have documentation of everything. "Keep that documentation safe," Thomas advised. "Trevor has friends here, and not everyone is happy about the new compliance procedures you'll be implementing." His warning proved prescient. Over the next few days, I encountered passive resistance from several departments. Meetings were scheduled without notifying me. Documents arrived for review at the last minute, and some executives suddenly became unavailable when I needed their input. Sarah from my team reported hearing Trevor's allies framing the story as a power play on my part. "They're saying you set Trevor up to take a fall so you could get promoted," she told me, looking uncomfortable. "It's ridiculous, but people are talking." Despite these challenges, I focused on establishing the new procedures and preparing for Westfield's implementation. Michael Thompson from Westfield called midweek to confirm they were proceeding with the partnership. "Your handling of that situation impressed our entire executive team," he said. "We need partners who prioritize compliance without sacrificing effectiveness. You proved Sterling can be both." 2 weeks later, Trevor returned from his suspension. I encountered him in the break room the first time we'd seen each other since the Westfield presentation. The room fell silent as he spotted me. For a moment, I thought he might ignore me entirely, but instead he approached, his expression unreadable. "Congratulations on the promotion," he said stiffly, loud enough for others to hear. "I suppose I should thank you for not pressing for my termination." "That was never my goal, Trevor," I replied evenly. "I only wanted to ensure we presented Westfield with a compliant proposal." "Right," he said, his tone making it clear he didn't believe me. "Well, I've learned my lesson. Document everything right." "That's always good practice," I agreed, refusing to be baited into an argument. Trevor leaned closer, lowering his voice. "This isn't over, Harper. My father won't run this company forever." I met his gaze steadily. "I hope we can find a way to work together professionally, Trevor. Sterling is a great company that deserves our best efforts." Without waiting for his response, I filled my coffee cup and returned to my office. I knew Trevor's wounded pride made him dangerous, but I refused to be intimidated or drawn into office politics. 3 months after the incident, our implementation of the Westfield account was proceeding smoothly under the timeline I had originally proposed. The new compliance procedures were becoming standard practice, though not without ongoing resistance from some departments. In an unexpected development, Richard asked me to present our compliance framework at the annual Financial Services Conference, positioning Sterling as a leader in ethical business practices. The irony wasn't lost on me, considering how close we had come to compromising those very principles. As I prepared for the conference, Amanda stopped by my office. "Just wanted to let you know," she said quietly. "Trevor gave notice this morning. He's taking a position with Bradford Financial." "I see," I replied, unsure whether to feel relief or concern. Bradford was a smaller competitor, known for its aggressive, sometimes questionable tactics. "Richard is telling people it's a good opportunity for Trevor to gain experience elsewhere," Amanda continued. "But between us, I think they both realized this arrangement wasn't sustainable." That evening, Richard called me into his office for a drink after most employees had left. "To your successful first quarter as senior director," he said, raising a glass of scotch. "The Westfield implementation is ahead of schedule, and the board is impressed with the new compliance framework." "Thank you," I said, taking a small sip. "I heard about Trevor's resignation." Richard nodded slowly. "It's for the best. He needs to find his own path, not live in my shadow, or spend his career recovering from this mistake." He looked at me thoughtfully. "Sometimes our greatest failures lead to our most important growth. That's true for companies as well as people." I understood he was referring not just to Trevor, but to Sterling Financial itself, which had emerged stronger from this crisis under my compliance leadership. "I appreciate your support through all of this," I told him. "It couldn't have been easy balancing your roles as CEO and father." "No," Richard agreed. "But integrity sometimes requires difficult choices. That's something I hope Trevor will learn at Bradford, though I have my doubts about their culture." He smiled wryly. "Perhaps you've noticed I've been more directly involved in day-to-day operations recently." I had noticed. Richard had been attending more departmental meetings, asking more questions generally, taking a more hands-on approach than before. "I realized I'd become too removed," he continued. "I delegated too much without proper oversight, assuming everyone shared my commitment to ethical business practices." He raised his glass again. "To lessons learned, Harper, and to Sterling's future." As I left Richard's office that evening, I reflected on the journey of the past few months. What had begun as a humiliating exclusion from a presentation had transformed into an opportunity to reshape Sterling's approach to compliance and my own career trajectory. By standing firm on my principles without making it personal, I had earned respect from colleagues, clients, and even Richard himself. The challenges weren't over, certainly. Some of Trevor's allies remained skeptical of my leadership, and implementing rigorous compliance procedures in a competitive industry would always face resistance. But I had proven to myself and others that doing things the right way wasn't just ethically sound, it was good business. The Westfield partnership, now proceeding smoothly under proper regulatory frameworks, was evidence of that fact. As I gathered my things to head home, I noticed the framed mission statement on my office wall. One of the reasons I'd joined Sterling in the first place. Success without integrity is not success at all. Today, those words rang truer than ever. 3 months after Trevor's departure, Sterling Financial had undergone a remarkable transformation. The compliance framework I'd implemented had become the company's competitive advantage, attracting clients who valued transparency and regulatory adherence above all else. What began as a crisis had evolved into a renaissance for the firm's core values. On a crisp fall morning, I sat in my expanded corner office, reviewing the quarterly performance reports. The Westfield account was exceeding expectations, not despite our strict compliance measures, but because of them. Our methodical approach had prevented several potential regulatory issues that could have resulted in costly penalties or delays. My phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer. "Did you see the news about Bradford?" I hadn't, so I quickly pulled up the financial news on my computer. The headline made my heart skip. Bradford Financial under SEC investigation for regulatory violations. According to the article, the investigation centered around misrepresentations made to clients about investment timelines and guaranteed returns led by their newest executive, Trevor Sterling. I felt no satisfaction at Trevor's downfall, only a profound sadness that he hadn't learned from his mistakes at Sterling. Despite our professional conflicts, I had never wished him harm. In many ways, his situation reflected the very lesson I had tried to convey: shortcuts in compliance eventually lead to greater problems down the road. Later that day, Richard stopped by my office, closing the door behind him. "I assume you've seen the Bradford news," he said, his expression somber. I nodded. "I'm sorry, Richard. I know this must be difficult for you." He sighed heavily, taking a seat across from my desk. "I spoke with Trevor this morning. He's resigned from Bradford and hired legal counsel." Richard looked every bit his 60 years in that moment. "He finally admitted that you were right all along. He said he carried the same attitudes to Bradford, believing that regulations were obstacles to be circumvented, rather than guardrails to be respected." "That's a painful lesson to learn," I said quietly. "Indeed," Richard agreed. "But perhaps a necessary one. The irony is that if he had listened to you from the beginning, he might still be on track to lead this company someday." We sat in thoughtful silence for a moment before Richard continued. "I'm not getting any younger, Harper. I've been thinking about succession planning more seriously since all this happened." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by this turn in the conversation. "The board and I have been discussing leadership development," he continued. "We'd like you to join the Executive Leadership Program. It's a 2-year track that prepares high-potential directors for C-suite positions." The offer stunned me. "I'm honored, Richard, but I'm a compliance specialist, not a general business executive." Richard smiled. "That's exactly why we want you in the program. Sterling needs leadership that understands compliance isn't a department. It's a philosophy that should permeate every aspect of our business." He leaned forward. "You don't need to decide right away. Think about it." After Richard left, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. When I'd been locked out of that conference room 6 months ago, feeling humiliated and powerless, I could never have imagined it would lead to this opportunity. The pain of that moment had transformed into something valuable, not just for me, but for Sterling Financial as a whole. By choosing integrity over ego, documentation over drama, and solutions over blame, I had not only saved my career, but elevated it to new heights. That evening, I met Sarah and Jennifer for dinner to share the news about the Executive Leadership Program. "You absolutely have to do it," Sarah insisted, raising her glass in a toast. "From locked out of meetings to future CEO, that's what I call a comeback story." Jennifer nodded enthusiastically. "The company needs more leaders like you, Harper. People who understand that doing the right thing isn't just about following rules, it's about building trust." Their support warmed my heart, reminding me how important allies had been throughout this journey. While Trevor had cultivated superficial relationships based on favors and influence, I had built genuine connections grounded in mutual respect and shared values. "Remember what Trevor said to you that day?" Jennifer asked. "Let's see how she handles it." I bet he never imagined you'd handle it by essentially taking his career path." We laughed, but her comment reminded me of an important truth. Success isn't about defeating others, but about staying true to your principles, even when tested. The following week, I accepted Richard's offer to join the Executive Leadership Program. My first assignment was to develop a presentation for our annual client conference on compliance as competitive advantage, based on the Westfield case study, with all names changed to protect confidentiality, of course. As I prepared for the presentation, I received an unexpected email from Michael Thompson at Westfield. "Your integrity saved both our companies from a potential disaster. Never underestimate the value of standing your ground professionally." His message crystallized the most important lesson from this entire experience. Integrity isn't a burden that slows success, but the foundation that makes lasting success possible. In the months that followed, I gradually rebuilt some of the professional relationships that had been strained during the Trevor conflict. David Garcia, our CFO, who had initially been skeptical of my excessive caution, became one of my strongest allies in promoting compliance throughout the organization. "You know," he told me during a strategy session, "I used to think compliance people were just there to tell us what we couldn't do. Now I understand you're actually showing us how to do things right the first time." Even some of Trevor's former allies came around as they witnessed the company's growth under the new compliance-focused approach. Bradley Cooper, who had once called me the hall monitor, now regularly consulted me before developing new business proposals. "It's actually easier this way," he admitted. "Building compliance in from the start, instead of trying to retrofit it later, saves so much time and stress." 1 year after the locked conference room incident, Sterling Financial hosted a compliance best practices roundtable for industry leaders. As I stood at the podium looking out at the assembled executives, including representatives from our competitors and regulatory agencies, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey. Compliance isn't about saying no, I told the audience. It's about finding the right way to say yes. It's not about limitations, but about building sustainable success on a foundation of integrity. After the presentation, Richard pulled me aside. "I'm more convinced than ever that you're the future of this company, Harper. You've transformed what could have been our greatest vulnerability into our greatest strength." His words reminded me that our most difficult challenges often contain the seeds of our greatest growth. Had Trevor not locked me out that day, I might have remained just another mid-level director, and Sterling might have continued with its inconsistent approach to compliance. That night, I stood on my apartment balcony, looking out at the city lights, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had been worthwhile. I had stayed true to my values, even when it would have been easier to compromise, and that integrity had ultimately been recognized and rewarded. The locked door that was meant to exclude me had instead opened a path to new opportunities and deeper understanding of my own strength. I had discovered that true leadership isn't about wielding power over others, but about empowering everyone to uphold shared principles. As I sipped my tea, I thought about all the people facing their own locked doors in workplaces around the world, wondering if standing up for what's right is worth the risk. If I could tell them anything, it would be this: integrity might not provide immediate victory, but it offers something far more valuable, a foundation you can build your entire career upon, without fear of collapse. Sometimes the people who try to undermine you actually end up elevating you in ways they never intended. Trevor's attempt to exclude me had ultimately pushed me toward inclusion at the highest levels of the company. His "let's see how she handles it" challenge had become the catalyst for my greatest professional growth. The most powerful response to exclusion isn't outrage or vengeance, but excellence and integrity maintained even under pressure. That's the lesson I carry forward every day, as I help shape Sterling Financial's future, a future built on the principle that doing things right is always the right thing to do. Have you ever been locked out of an opportunity that was rightfully yours? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below about times when you had to stand up for yourself professionally. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video if it resonated with you. Remember, integrity isn't just about following rules. It's about having the courage to stand by your principles, even when it's difficult. Thank you for watching, and may you always find the strength to unlock doors that others try to close in your face.